Hi, my name's Aaron Riley, and I'm going to be talking to you about Project Search, which is a high school transition program that we developed about 16 years ago. So essentially, just to let you know who I am and how this presentation is going to go, the presentation is called Achieving Meaningful Employment for Youth with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, High School Transition, the Project Search Way. And I actually am a nurse. I had no experience in working with people with disabilities. I was the manager of the emergency department at Cincinnati Children's Medical Center. And about 16 years ago, I was sitting in my office and I looked out into our lobby and I recognized, I was struck by the fact that many of the people sitting in our lobby were people with disabilities. And I started to think about it because our hospital was doing a huge diversity initiative. And I started to think about what people with disabilities could do or couldn't do or what I knew about them. And I did a little bit of exploration within the hospital, talked to our CFO, and asked him how many people with disabilities were treated at our hospital each year, what portion of our revenue came from providing services. And it turns out it was really high. I also looked at our clinics. We have about 56 clinics, and it turns out that 2/3 of them are even named after a disability. We have Down syndrome clinic, autism clinic, epilepsy clinic, cerebral palsy clinic. I could go on and on. What we hadn't done at Children's Hospital was provide opportunities for the patients that were coming to us throughout their lives who happened to have disabilities. We hadn't provided them with opportunities to train in positions or come to a training program at the hospital, and we had never proactively hired a person with a disability. When we looked into it, we pretty much had been doing one thing. We'd been allowing them to volunteer, and that was all. And so I decided that I would reach out into the community and talk to people who were disability experts and see how we could create a program that allowed us to train people with disabilities to do the jobs that we had available in our hospital, and how we could also use the hospital to train people with disabilities to do jobs out in the community. And so I reached out to Susie Rutkowski and Jennifer Linneberry from education, from voc rehab, and from developmental disability. And we sat down and came up with a model which made sense to me, a businesswoman. And that's how we started Project Search. So today I'm going to talk to you about what Project Search is and what we do. So essentially, in a nutshell, Project Search is a one-year school-to-work program for young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'll be talking about this further. This is just to kind of give you the overview before I start my presentation so you know where we're going. The goal of Project Search is always one thing above all others, and that is competitive employment. We take young people and we put them into a business, and it is total workplace immersion. That is a cornerstone of what Project Search is. There are many good transition programs out there that will go into a workplace for several hours a day and teach folks skills. We take that one step further. We build on that experience, and we put our young people into a business for 100% of their final year of high school eligibility. What they're going to do, they're going to rotate through 3 internships over the course of that year, and they're going to focus on career exploration and job skill acquisition. So they're going to learn marketable skills that they can take out into the world. And then finally, Project Search culminates with customized job search assistance and follow-along that's provided as long as those folks are employed. So that's, in a nutshell, the Project Search model. What's our philosophy? Stephen Simon said this a long time ago. He said, people with disabilities have the right to choose a path toward education and employment. However, while freedom of choice is given, the right to work is earned. And earning the right to work is dependent upon the student's preparation. At Project Search, we feel very strongly that people with disabilities are just like everybody else. If they want to work, they still must earn the right to work, and that means they have to gain the preparation necessary to do a given job. The problem in America is that there aren't many opportunities that teach them or that give them the preparation they need to do the work. So Project Search is a program where our young people earn the right to work by gaining preparation. In terms of a focus on employment, Siegel in 1993 said, "Those who have failed to achieve a gainful career are also missing out on the richness of having an economic life, the self-respect that comes from earning a decent wage, and the sense of community and personal growth that comes from being part of a work culture." I'm always struck by this because I think for too many people with disabilities, they are denied this the self-respect that comes from earning a decent wage and the sense of community and personal growth. I was talking to someone yesterday, and he was telling me that he reads obituaries kind of as a hobby. But his point, I think, and we were talking about this presentation, his point was that when you read someone's obituary, you know, in this paragraph that summarizes their life, it says basically two things about the person. It says who loved them and what they did. And so much of our life is about what we do, and yet without preparation, without training, people with disabilities are often denied that ability to say, this is what I do, to tell the story of their life. So Project Search, I mentioned this briefly. We essentially, when we started, said, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's good things going on. How do we take the best practices that are out there? How do we take what's been learned, bring it together differently, really in a business-led model, but still work with the same people who are experts? And so Project Search, no matter where we have a program, it doesn't matter. We always work with largely the 5 same partners. So our program always takes place within a business. And if you go to the right, we are always working with DRS, with the Division of Rehab Services, or VOC Rehab, because they have a role in the lives of people with disabilities and employment. So it's natural for us to work with them. We always work with a supported employment agency, and that group works with us by providing job coaches. We always work with long-term support agencies or DD agencies because many people with disabilities who get jobs, just because you're employed, you don't lose your disability. And getting a job is just half the hurdle. Keeping the job is the other. So Project Search always incorporates long-term support. And then lastly, there's the school or education. All Project Search programs have an educational partner, and they work with us on the educational components of transition. And my slide is missing one word, and that is there should be the word intern right in the middle. They really are the 6th and key partner of this whole proposal. So I want to talk a little bit about funding. I think it's important to again, to show you how our model works, and because this is often misunderstood. And so if you look at the top of my slide, it says serial funding, and starts with education, then says VOC Rehab, and then says developmental disability. And I use VR and DD because they tend to be the more generic terms nationwide. But typically, if you're a person with a disability and you have certain entitlements throughout your life, you have to qualify for those entitlements, but in general, there is a series of entitlements that are pretty common across the United States. And the first is education. If you meet certain requirements, you are entitled to take part in special education, and you will have an IEP or a 504 plan. And as you work through education, there are goals there. The schools are going to be graded on how well they do. When it gets to the final 4 years of education, that's considered a transition period in education. It's typically an 18 to 21-year-old period, and the focus is transition. I mean, that's the entire focus of that 4-year period. It's transitioning you to adulthood with everything else that means: employment, independence, many things, social activities out in the community. So education is tasked with transitioning young people to adulthood, including employment. And there's a certain amount of money that goes with that. Schools are given funding to work on transition. Plus, they're even graded on that. And in the United States, there are indicators 13 and 14, which grade schools on how well they're doing on getting folks employed in the community who have disabilities. So education has that goal, if you look at that slide. Now, if a young person with a disability leaves school and they don't get a job, then they go to Voc Rehab. And Voc Rehab is tasked with essentially the same thing that education was in those final years, getting a person a job or helping them to get a job. And so you have two groups that are being paid to do essentially the same thing, only they do it differently and they don't necessarily work together. And then if a person with a disability gets a job, they go on to, or doesn't get a job, they can go on to a developmental disabilities services, and that group is responsible for keeping them in a job, or if they've been unsuccessful with getting a job with either education or VR, the young person might be placed in an enclave or a workshop. So again, a piece of employment. So you have these three key groups in every community in the United States that have some emphasis and some funding that is meant to help with employment of people with disabilities. And yet, as a rule, these groups don't work together on any given employment trajectory at the same time. And so what we did, we basically said from a business point of view, can we combine resources, can we combine gifts, talents, knowledge from all three of these partners into 1 year and call that program Project Search and insert it into a business? So that's really what Project Search is. It's the final year of someone's education. VR is going to step in and be a much more active partner. They may even, they will fund part of the year, and DD is going to step in and be there in terms of the job search and then follow along, job follow along. So that's Project Search is that final year of high school eligibility, but we have all three partners. And I think one thing about Project Search, and I've added this recently to my presentation, because collaboration is hard, and people say to me every day, you know, what are the hardest parts of Project Search? And I think I don't even have to think about it really. It's collaboration. I'm going to just go back. It's saying to education, VR, and developmental disabilities, yes, you have your policies. Yes, you have your funding streams and your billing systems. And yes, you have your mission. And yes, they're different, but you still are really supposed to be serving the same group of people. And so let's work together. But taking those three groups and working together is really, really hard. And then inserting them into a business. And here's just one example of how this plays out. And I think what I should say is that what Project Search does sometimes, and we hear this from around the country, because we bring these groups together and make them work on one project, it's a really good way to look at overall systems change. And I know in the state of New York, Project Search was written into their federal systems change grant because our program requires these partners to come together and talk about who they are, what they bring to the table, and how we can work most effectively. But so anyway, it's interesting. Project Search has one goal: employment. And I think if you look at this slide, during that transition period, education would tell you they care about employment. Voc Rehab would tell you they're there for employment. Developmental disability would tell you they care about employment. And yet when you ask them to define employment, you get three vastly different definitions. And so here's the example. During that 4-year transition period in education, and you're talking about transition and the indicators, in education, employment can count as being a homemaker, joining the military, going on to some further education or taking some classes, going into a workshop, going into an enclave, or last but not least, going on to competitive employment. And in education, under Indicator 14, if any one of those things are done for a person with a disability, the school can count that as 100% passage of Indicator 14. So you could have an entire class of young people with significant disabilities who leave education without employment, and yet the school, because of these very definitions, can get a 100% passing grade. And now, so what happens is we have schools that are doing really well on their indicator, and not very many people with disabilities nationwide who are actually leaving school and going into employment. It's less than 10%. And so then those young people go to voc rehab. Well, voc rehab has only one definition of employment, and that means competitive employment. And then you go to developmental disability, and in many countries, or many states rather, employment for DD can be competitive employment, but it also is day programs, enclaves, and workshops. So here's the issue with this. When we bring all three of these partners together and ask them to work on employment, they have to collaborate on one common definition of employment. They can't revert back to their individual definition of employment, or it can hurt all of the partners. So for example, if we have a project search program and we take 10 young people and put it into a business, and at the end of the year, only 5 of those young people are employed, and the other 5 are sent to a course or they go home to be a homemaker, the school will say or can say that year has been incredibly successful because they can get a passing grade. But to VR and the other partners who've taken part in this year, that year is going to be a failure because half of the people fail to get competitive employment. So this probably sounds very semantic, but it's really important because there's so many. Employment's just one way in which these 3 partners are tasked with essentially the same big thing. It's one way in which they have to do the same work, but they do it differently. And so when you're bringing them together to collaborate, you must address that. And in Project Search, we force our teams to come up with one common definition that they all see as success so that all partners benefit. And this is the other thing. So, our Project Search is transformational collaboration. It's not taking Project Search and saying, well, I'm going to do it, but we'll go back to the school and we'll use our policies to do it, and then we'll tell you how to do it or how we've decided we'll do it as a team. It's not voc rehab saying, well, we went back and talked about it at the office, and this is what we've decided the Project Search site will look like. We'll follow our policies. It's all of the partners coming together, lending essentially people to the process, and then working as a shared team. All right, now I get into a little more of the informational piece. So some of this will be a recap of my first slide. We're a 1-year program, 1 school year. So whenever your school starts in the fall and whenever it ends in the spring, that's how long our program runs. And for that entire school year, we're going to take 10 to 12 students with a wide variety of intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we're going to place them inside of a business. So for that entire school year, they will never step foot inside their school. They should be coming from home to the business, and from the business, they should be going home at the end of the day. If you have a young person who wants to attend pep rallies or assemblies, or who still wants to be, to go to the games or be captain of the basketball team, they're probably not ready yet for Project Search, because this is about 100% focus on gaining the skills you need to be employed. And we are transitioning the person from high school student to young adult. So 100% of the time, they're in the business. And while they're there, they have to dress like the business dresses, follow the same policies and procedures. They have to follow the same attendance policy. And it's a very strict and regimented program. But it's about growing up, and because we remove them from that school experience and we expect them to act like an adult in their new business setting, within weeks we see dramatic change. So 10 to 12 students are going to go inside our business, and along with those students, we're going to have a teacher and job coaches. The teacher is going to come from the school, and it's going to be the same teacher that it might have been in the class. We're just going to shift the teacher from living and operating in a school to living and operating in a business. And we're going to shift what that teacher is teaching and doing as a part of his or her school day. We're going to have job coaches who work with the teacher, and those job coaches might be a paraprofessional from the school, but it's also going to be a job coach who comes from an agency who specializes in accommodations and adaptations, and that agency is going to be paid by Voc Rehab to insert that job coach into the business as part of a team. Now, it's really key to remember that the teacher and the job coaches are the same people all year long. It's not okay to send in a different teacher every day or a different job coach every day. We are inserting into the business a core team that's there full time, and they're the same team that's there every day. And so this group's going to be immersed in the host business culture. For example, in our hospital where I work at Cincinnati Children's, you can't wear open-toed shoes, and you can't wear sleeveless shirts. You can't have tattoos that show. And so for both our teacher, our job coaches, and our students, for all of them, they have to follow that same dress code. So it may be a little bit different than it was in the school. Over the course of the year, they're going to rotate through 3 unpaid internships, and they're going to get continual feedback, and the focus is on learning skills, marketable skills. And so those 3 unpaid internships are going to be inside business departments. The young people go to internship sites independently by themselves. They may have a job coach, but we don't take a group of 3 young people, put them into one department as a little group, and have them learn the same thing. They go independently into different departments. And you know what? The outcome is employment in the community. And I want to talk about this a little bit. I think sometimes people say to me, well, or a lot of times I'll have people who assume that because business is hosting this program, that they've committed to employ every single person with a disability. And that's not feasible. We would never ask a business to do that. And let me just talk a little bit about Children's. Children's has over 60 education programs. We train doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, child life therapists, OTs, PTs, women on public assistance. I could go on. And in each of those programs, the same thing is true. We open up our facility and we offer them an opportunity to learn skills, but we don't guarantee a single one of them employment. Children's trains hundreds of nurses every year, but we don't guarantee any of them a job. What we do have is a willingness to hire strong candidates and a welcoming attitude toward the people we're training. And that is exactly what we expect of our partner businesses. There's no way we expect our partner business to hire every single intern. They couldn't do it. It's not a practical business idea. What they can do, though, is allow us to learn skills inside their business that are useful in the community. They can stand behind our graduates when we go out to look at jobs. They can write letters of recommendation. And just standing behind us in terms of supporting us and loaning us their name when we go out to the community is a huge big deal. It's a huge incentive to other businesses. So what about outcome of employment in the community? I'm just going to tell you two stories real quickly to kind of underline this point. We had a young woman who came to one of our programs in Cincinnati, and her dream was to be a nun. Well, none of our programs specialize in training a young person to be a nun. It's not what we do. But all of our programs have departments and areas where we can teach you component skills for just about anything, because businesses are a microcosm of the working world. So this young woman had been going out west every year since she was 16 and going to a program called Novitiate Camp. And at the end of Novitiate Camp, they decide whether they're going to invite her to become a novitiate nun or not. She'd been going since she was 16. They'd never invited her to become a nun and to stay on in the program. So she came back to Cincinnati for her final year of education and came into Project Search really kind of as a last resort, not something that she was totally excited about. We heard that she wanted to be a nun, and so our teacher called the head of the order, I believe it was in Oklahoma, called the head of the order and said, what is it you need to do to be a nun? What is she missing? And once we found that out, then we built internships that taught her those skills. So she had one internship where she practiced introducing herself, and she practiced her personal space and meeting strangers. And so every one of her internships was set up to teach her the skills she needed to be a nun, even though it was inside a business. And when she graduated from our program, she became a novitiate nun because she'd had a year of experience. We also had a young woman who wanted to work at a Hallmark store. And she came into our program. Well, we're not a Hallmark store, but we can teach the components you need to work in a Hallmark store. So we always start by calling and saying, what do your job descriptions say? What do you need to work here? And then we find the locations that'll teach those skills. So we could put this young girl in materials management and teach her how to open a box safely and what to do with the cartons once she'd taken them out of the box and how to put them on the shelves in alphabetical order. Her second internship, she could be in our pharmacy where she learned how to front shelves and how to check expiration dates. And her third internship, she could be in our gift shop where she learned how to do seasonal displays and other activities. And today, or at the end of the program, and today, she's working at the Hallmark store in her community. So Project Search is about employment in the community. Some of our folks are going to be hired in the host business, but not all. And what we're trying to teach are marketable skills. Now, one caveat to this statement, a lot of our young people don't know as clearly what they want to do when they grow up, so they may not know they want to work in a Hallmark store. And in that case, those internships are going to be set up to show them more skills and give them an idea based on some tours and other things. Give them an idea of what they do best and like best. So who do we take into our program? We're looking for folks who are 18 to 21, who are in their last year of high school eligibility. So this program, once you come into it, whether you're 18 or 19, it's meant to be your last year and you're meant to go on to employment. This isn't for a young person to say, well, I'm tired of my school, I'm going to come into Project Search at 19, but then I may not want to get a job, I may want to go back to school for 2 more years. That's not what we do, because our program is resource intensive. We're asking all these groups to partner together in this really intense year, and it's meant to have an outcome of employment. So we have to have young people who have the maturity and knowledge that they're going to leave and exit to work. They have to be eligible for services. In other words, they have to be eligible to work with DRS, VR, and DD. You know what? They have to have appropriate hygiene, social, and communication skills. Now, I think sometimes I put communication skills up there and people think, well, what if our folks don't read or write? And you know what? I think nationwide in Project Search, probably the majority of the kids we take into the program are not strong readers or writers. It's really not necessary. But they have to have some way of making themselves understood, whether that's an iPad, an iPhone, whether it's an alphabet board or an interpreter. We don't care what it is, but they have to have some way. They have to be able to take direction and change behavior. And by this I mean stop or go and not run away if a door is open. So some very basic ability to take direction and change behavior. Our program requires people to access public transportation. It's probably one of the hardest things we talk about, and both parents and teachers often get really nervous about it. But we are the last year of transition, and you're going to leave educational services. And so we believe that you can't really call something transition if you don't teach your young people how to get around in the community post-school. And a lot of times, people will say, well, we don't have good public transportation in our community. We don't have a subway. We don't have buses. And so, so we have to use the school bus. And what we say to that is that unless you think the situation is going to change before this person's graduating, then we better teach them how to use what exists. And we don't care if they rollerblade, if they ride a horse, we don't care. If they come with their neighbor, a cousin, they'd best be figuring it out, because the day they leave school, they're not going to have the school bus. And we've done them a real disservice if we've let them rely on that and not learned how to use what's available in their community. In our program, they have to pass a drug screen and a background check, and most of all, they have to want to work. If you don't want to work and you're not interested in getting a job, we have limited slots in our program, and we have to take the people who most want to be employed. Here's our definition of successful employment. And again, this definition is a combination of education's definition, VR's definition, and DD's definition. And all partners agree on this outcome. So in Project Search, successful employment is competitive employment in an integrated setting. It cannot be a sheltered workshop or an enclave. It is year-round work. It's 16 hours a week or more. We prefer more. And it is minimum wage or higher. And I want to go back to the 16 hours a week or more. In our program, if someone is offered a full-time job and they want it, then we always want the person to work as many hours as they possibly can. What we don't do is have a business offer us full-time and then say to the business, well, if we broke this into 2 half-time jobs, we could get 2 people employed. Yes, we'd get 2 people employed, but they would not make enough to lift themselves out of poverty. So we're always going for a job that has the most hours possible. This is our annual Project Search calendar. So typically, we start in the fall, we end in the spring, and each school district adapts that to their standard time. Ours say August and June, but that could be September and May, depending on what your school district does. Over the course of the year, you see the 3 internships up there. Terry, hold on one second, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to start again, Terry. This is our annual Project Search schedule. We begin in the fall and we end in the spring, and that can vary depending on your typical start dates. At the beginning of the school year, there's always an orientation to the business, and that takes approximately 3 weeks, and the teacher and the students are going to learn the culture of that business and the rules of that business. And then they're going to begin their internships. And I mentioned earlier, each young person is going to have 3 internships over the course of the year, and each internship is individualized to them. They don't go to their internships as part of a group. There's some best practice around these internships. One of the best things we see is that some of our sites have their internships interview with a department at the beginning of the internship. And then 2 weeks before the internship is over, they write a letter of resignation, and they get an evaluation, and they do an exit interview. And they do that 3 times over the course of the year. So they've interviewed and exited appropriately. But here's the really cool thing about it. Not only are our young people interviewing and exiting in a real situation, we also have this moment in time to teach managers and department heads how to interview people with disabilities. Because truthfully, they're just as scared, and they don't know what to ask, and they don't know how to tease out the incredible skills that people with disabilities have. And so this whole interview exit process changes the culture of the business. And you know, the other thing I think we do at the end of it, when we're doing those exit interviews and the evals, it's real easy for a business person to say, oh, you know, I really liked them, they were great in our department, so I'm going to give them 100. Well, just because you have a disability doesn't mean you get 100 on everything. And so we're teaching our managers to set realistic goals and to hold people accountable. Because too often, when we don't do that for people with disabilities, what we end up doing is a huge disservice, because they learn, it's almost learned helplessness. Or you learn that you don't have to do the full job and you still get a passing grade. And that may work in school, but it's not going to work in a job. And so we have to teach managers and business people how to be appropriate with people with disabilities, because quite honestly, it's the managers who are often the problem when people with disabilities lose their jobs. So we're teaching that piece. They're going to go through those 3 internships. In between each internship, there's going to be a transition week where they come back, they update their resume, they work on their interest. We make sure that they're getting marketable skills, and then they go back out to their 2nd and 3rd internships. During each internship, each young person is going to have 2 employment planning meetings. And those are meetings where we pull the whole team together and we sit down and we say, are we reaching our goal? Are we teaching marketable skills? Are we using our resources wisely? And are we moving toward an outcome of employment? The parents attend that, the young person attends that, VR, DD, someone from the business, and we do that twice in internship. We also have a family involvement program that runs alongside the school year, only it's a curriculum that we develop for our families. And so we're teaching our families how to have high expectations and how to, what to do to increase the likelihood of employment for their young person. And then we set up a BAC, or a Business Advisory Committee. And so alongside each Project Search school year, when the students are in their program, we're running 2 programs, one for the family and one for the business, to teach them how to work with our folks. We work on the job search. That intensifies during the 2nd internship. Our folks graduate in the spring and they go on to employment. This is what our day looks like. Every morning at 8 o'clock, we start with an hour of employability skills curriculum. And we don't teach math or English or science. We teach how to get a job and how to keep a job. We teach the culture of the business in which our program is embedded. We find out from them what's important. So at our hospital, it's really important that people know how to wash their hands, and they understand infectious disease, and they understand confidentiality. And so we focus on those things along with employability skills in general. In Project Search, we have a curriculum, we have lesson plans for every day of the year, and we teach those skills. At 9 o'clock, they go out to their internship sites. They stay out there the rest of the day. At 2 o'clock, they come back to review the day. And we debrief and we evaluate every one of our interns on skills, attitude, and appearance. And we teach them how to evaluate themselves, and again, not give themselves a perfect score every day if it's not deserved. So in general, our young people spend about 4 to 6 hours a day out on their internships for a total of about 910 hours per year. What we're teaching We're teaching social skills in a real environment. We're teaching work skills in an integrated setting. The other thing we're doing is that once a young person learns a skill, we add another skill. So we're teaching cascading skills. It's not enough to take a person with a disability, put them in a department, have them master something, and then just let them sit there and do that for another 9 weeks. We have to be upping the game. We have to be teaching them as much as possible so that they're marketable and they can go out into the world. And that comes to my last point. They have to be marketable skills. You know, when we started this program, some of my friends who were department heads came to me and said, you know what, Aaron, you know, we have waiting areas, and we have lots of toys that the kids have played with during the day, and they need to be wiped down and sterilized a couple times a day. And the staff who's hired to do that, that's the thing they like the least. And the volunteers don't want to do that because they want to hold babies. And so I had all these people calling and saying, could we have one of your interns to come in and wipe down the toys? And I talked to people about this because the answer here is absolutely not. This is not even negotiable, because it is not a marketable skill. Unless there's a job that is just teaching someone to wipe down toys, then using them to do something that no one else wants to do is not ethical. It's not the right thing to do. We have to teach people with disabilities skills that are going to help them get a job and be independent. People with disabilities are not the people who want to do all the scut work in society. They're not the people who exist to do everything that no one else wants to do for free. And so, and we have to teach our businesses that. I think sometimes we're so eager to get into a business, and we're so, we want so badly to show them what we can do that we say yes to things that we should not. We don't have to take every opportunity. We're not that desperate. We have a limited period of time to teach people with disability skills, and we need to make sure they're real skills. Now let me just give you an example though, because if those department heads came back and said, you know what, no one wants to do this job, what would happen if each department took a piece of our job, piece of our budget, we put it together, we created a job that was going to be sterilizing these toys? Would that work? Well, of course that would, because it would be a job. And we would go back and we would ask our folks, is anyone interested in this position? And it's a paying position, and it has hours and benefits. You know, just one more example about this, because I think it's important. The head of our volunteer office called and said, could we have an intern to stuff envelopes, because we have a huge project and our volunteers don't like stuffing envelopes, and so it's probably going to take 1 or 2 internships to get this project done. Well, the answer is no. I mean, in this program and in life, people with disabilities do not exist to do the things that no one else wants to do. And we're not training people with disabilities to be volunteers. And this is really a volunteer job. So unless you live in a community where there's a business that has a full-time job where someone's only going to be stuffing envelopes, then to let them do that and just that for an entire internship is a huge disservice. Because here's the thing, businesses are not stupid, and we will never pay for something we can get for free. And when you come in and you ask to do volunteer activities, we get the impression, whether you say it or not, that the reason you're asking that is because it must be what you want, or because it must be what people with disabilities are good at. And so we are led down this belief path that's not even accurate, really sometimes through no fault of our own. So this program is about teaching people with disabilities marketable skills, but it's also about teaching the business that people with disabilities are incredibly valuable. They can do real work, they can do very complicated work, and they can be contributing members of society, and we need to teach everybody that. This is a really good example of a young woman. I have permission to mention all their names. Her name is Sarah, and Sarah was in our program at Fifth Third Bank. It's a very large bank, and all she knew was that she wanted to do something clerical. And so the way we started is we looked at all the clerical job descriptions in the bank. So we pulled admin, receptionist, secretary, and we sat down and looked at what skills those jobs had in common. And we then spent the year over the course of her internships teaching Sarah those key skills. So in her first internship, she was in the vice president's office. We focused on the phone. Sarah uses a wheelchair. She has limited use of her arms. And so we had to teach her, how do you get a headset on with one arm? What do you say when you answer the phone? How do you take a message? And what do you do with that message once you've taken it? And we worked on those skills, and probably the first 30 or 40 phone calls she got came from our teacher and our job coach. Because we're not going to go into a business and say, hey, we're here today, we'd like to start answering your phones. No business wants that. They want to know, to be assured that their work's going to carry on. So we're going to practice it until Sarah has a level of success. And then we're going to say to that department, can Sarah answer 1 out of every 10 incoming phone calls? And when she answers that one, the first few times she does it, we're going to have someone there to make sure she does it right. And then as she advances and is more and more capable of that work, she's going to increase the number of phone calls she answers. But she may never answer every phone call during that first internship. Her second internship, she went to consumer lending, and she focused on computer skills, and we loaded drag and dictate and JAWS, and we taught her how to set up an appointment between 2 people in Outlook. Now at the same time, what was she doing? She was continuing to practice answering the phone. And then we're always adding more and more skills so that she learns as much as she possibly can. Her third rotation, she went out with a receptionist in the main lobby, and she learned how to take a picture and make a name badge and sign someone in. And at the end of her year, she actually was hired as a receptionist, the front desk receptionist in a main corporation in Cincinnati. And she's now worked there, I think, about 7 or 8 years. There's very little chance that Sarah, with no training, could have gotten a job as the lead receptionist at a corporation in downtown Cincinnati with no training. You can't walk off the street and get that kind of job. And so Sarah had a year to learn those skills. Our program is about total workplace immersion. And sometimes people say to me, well, we have a high school program and we go into businesses. And I just want to talk quickly about what some of the differences are between high school transition and a project search program. Let me be clear. We do not think every transition program in the world needs to be project search. We think there are some great programs out there that are doing fabulous things. And we actually think the best path is for a young person to go through high school, work in some of those transition programs, and then come to us for a final year. But we are different, and immersion is different than standard transition. If you look at the social environment, many high schools say, well, we're using social activities to develop a well-rounded student, but in our program, we're actually in a job, we're in a workplace, and we're using team-building activities and real staff meetings that have work-specific purposes to teach those social environments. So appropriate social behaviors are happening in an appropriate business setting. We're not practicing it. Same thing with performance. Schools are really good at rewarding effort, and they have lots of really creative strategies to achieve success. But in Project Search, we're not rewarding effort. We are rewarding results. And it is a huge difference, and our folks know it. Our young people with disabilities know the difference between practicing and effort and real results. And that's what you get with immersion. We are always looking for alternative ways to give employees the skills to perform the job. And because we're in an employment setting, we can come up with as many adaptations and accommodations as necessary to do the job, but it's all in a real place. Looking at dress code, schools tolerate casual dress and lots of things are tolerated. In a business, that's just not the case. And so we focus on specific uniform requirements and rules. In terms of support personnel, if you look in a high school, you have lots of people there who are meant to help our young people handle their personal and academic problems. In a high school, in our transition program, the job coach and the teacher are dealing with real work-related issues in a real work environment. And things aren't tolerated that would be in a school. I think every young person, disability or not, knows that they have to go to school. And they also know they can do certain things, but that school's going to take them back the next day. And in Project Search, we're not quite like that. And the business can set some rules, and if they are broken, that behavior is not tolerated, and we may even exit somebody. So it's a very different situation. In terms of discipline, in a school, you're going to have the special ed director or the administrator who's discussing discipline. In the business, we're going to use those managers, and we're going to include them in our conversations. We're going to use documentation and performance improvement plans that the business uses for their employees. And termination may actually result from something that's very, very inappropriate in a workplace. So this program doesn't joke around. And I think sometimes when I talk about this and I say that we exit folks, it scares people. But right now in Project Search, we're working with over 3,000 young people across the United States. And we exit very few, but we do exit folks when we need to, based on breaking business rules. And then the last thing is the atmosphere. There's a total difference between a school atmosphere and a business atmosphere. You know, in school, loud voices, you have some running in the hallways, you have bells. In a business, we're really looking at a quiet voice. That's the norm. We're looking at expectations that all employees have. So in our program, we focus on high expectations. And Mark Gold said, low expectancy on the part of society is the single most critical deterrent to programs for people with severe disabilities. And we are looking at raising the expectations of absolutely everybody. The person themselves, their teachers, their job coaches, business people, their parents, anyone we come in contact with, we're going to raise their expectations. I want to show you, we actually have a large number of programs in Scotland. And the Scottish government, when they invited us to come in and begin programs, they also funded research to be done about Project Search. I'm really proud to say we did not do this research. We had no part in it. And in addition to looking at some real quantitative data, they did this qualitative data, and I just want to talk you through it. Essentially, they use these things called star charts, and this is the carers star chart. In Scotland, they don't refer to parents or family members. They call them the carers. And so they went out and they talked to the families and the carers, and they asked, how did they do on these 10 components? Motivation, self-care, managing money, social networks, confidence, physical health, emotional and mental health, meaningful use of time, community integration, and employment. And they looked at 2 different classes. So the yellow to orange is 1 year. It was 12 students and 12 families. And then the aqua to the blue was our 2nd year of our program, a new set of young people and families. And over 2 years of data, what we found for 8 of the 10 indicators was that there was major change. The family perceived major change in their young person. So in terms of motivation, self-care, social networks, confidence, emotional health, meaningful use of time, and employability, there were huge growth seen in both years. The fun part of this is that there were a couple areas where there wasn't much growth. So the carers didn't see much growth for their young people in terms of managing money, or physical health, or community integration, because we're not, and they meant what happened at home in the evenings. So those things did not change much. What we like about this is that Project Search, what we focus on, employability, motivation, meaningful use of time, major change there. And then this gives us the ability to go back to our partners and say we need to be working more on these other things because they're equally important. This is the same chart, only it's the young people. And again, it's 2 years of young people, 2 separate groups, and we see almost exactly the same thing. Really huge marks in employability, in motivation, in meaningful use of time, in confidence. Less movement in terms of managing money, almost none, in terms of physical health, and in community integration. So it gives us something to work on, and we're already working on some programs, but it also tells us we're making a difference in terms of employability. I also want to talk a little bit about culture change. Project Search is a great program for people with disabilities. We get results. And I'm going to talk about those results in section 2 of this talk. But we're getting results. We have a lot of young people who are going out and being employed. But that's not all that's happening. What's happening is that we're creating a culture change inside our businesses. And I'm just going to use the hospital as an example. We could hire a person with a disability tomorrow and put them inside the cafeteria. And they might love that job and they might be a great worker. But they're not going to create a system-wide culture change. If I bring into a business 12 young people and they're supported by people who have expertise, then and those young people are going to rotate through 3 different internships over the course of the year, then by the end of the year, not only has the young person learned skills, but all the managers of the departments where they've gone to do their internships are now going to see a person with a disability through different eyes. And they're going to see them as a capable person who can do incredibly complex work. And they're going to think for the first time, maybe the first time, they're going to think, golly, this person is capable. They could work here and do a great job. And you're going to have all these different groups of staff throughout the business who now see people with disabilities as competent workers and someone who could work alongside them and do the job just as well. And you have patients and visitors who are going to come in and see our young people and think, wow, I didn't know that. If they can do this job, maybe they can work in my business in the community, or maybe my son or daughter can do this. And so you have family members who are going to start to see their kids as capable, their babies with Down syndrome, as able to grow up and carry out a very complex job. So our programs like this, no matter what it is, but transition programs are not just teaching people skills, they're changing the culture. They're teaching the internships, they're teaching department staff, they're changing the expectation for teachers and job coaches, and we hear it every day. Teachers saying, I really didn't think a person with a disability could do something this hard. And more importantly, we have teachers saying, I didn't even know these jobs existed. I didn't know what the title of these jobs were. I didn't even know what to be teaching my young people to do these jobs. We have family members. Recently in Richmond, Virginia, we had a couple, young parents who found out that their child had Down syndrome. They didn't know it. And the dad happened to walk out into the hall and see a young woman with Down syndrome who'd just been hired and was working in that department. And he went to speak to that department head because it had a profound impact on him. And it did many, many things, but maybe most importantly, it gave him hope for his child, and it also immediately set an expectation that his baby could grow up and be employed. And that's huge for our family members. It changes healthcare workers. It's good for every visitor and customer who comes in. It creates a culture change for advocacy groups and funders, and even for government. So programs like this, it really is a ripple effect. We just have to teach people, everybody, what people with disabilities are capable of. And once they see it, it changes how we treat people with disabilities and what we teach them. And that's what a solid transition program can do. I am going to stop here. And the rest of my talk will be under section 2. Thank you very much for listening.